taking all your time and effort. I know when I was an undergraduate, I had other things on my mind other than supply chain management, and I was really impressed overall with, I mean, at the level that you're at, I would expect a lot of the answers if they were grad students who actually, and the presentation skills are great. Wow, I mean, I'm really impressed. You can see I don't get out much either, so.
That's all yours, Nick.
I'm going to take you through the exact answers, but I also will tell you, you know, I'll give you a little bit more context to it too. So. Okay, here are the answers to the first question. How do you get the factory up and running? And then how do you keep it? Then 99 plus, and by the way, we kept it at 99 plus for over 3 years. And that was really hard, but we managed to do it. Most of you got the right answer. How do you do it overnight? The gray market. It's a necessary evil. And, you know, it wasn't just our industry that had it was on allocation. Obviously, memory's on allocation. It means a lot of other industries, electronic, that's consumer electronic components, were really at high demand and really building a lot of time. So we went to the gray market. We went to the CFO and said, hey, we need to do this. We're not going to do it any longer than we need to. So we had the authorization to go and pay double or triple or quadruple. One of the things that we saw was that in some cases, the looking at the lots and the date codes, the quality was there. But our problem was that some of it was fresh product, which meant that the system was rigged in some ways, maybe collusion with the suppliers, perhaps, and that they were selling fresh product at premium rates when it's supposed to be theoretically excess material that's available in the open market. So be careful for that if you ever get in that situation. The second part, I mean, the real strong part, this whole thing is about collaboration. I think all of you hit it. Nobody hit this one. I got on the plane immediately and went to Asia. I didn't wait for somebody to come and be my friend, and I had to become somebody's friend by showing up. And really, this guy, his name was Tom Lin. He was my equivalent in Taiwan, and he was pushing 65 or 68 years old at the time. He spoke fluent Japanese. What we had in common is I spoke Japanese. Even though I was much younger, a lot less experience, newcomer to the company, he could have just dismissed me outright. So we developed a bond that I kept for several years afterwards. So the Taiwan factory, you know, they did have a little bit extra. They might have had 2 or 3 days extra. So what we were doing is taking maybe a shift's worth of excess and overnighting it. There were some other actions regarding the suppliers of having them drop ship basically directly using premium freight, and that's very expensive. But we got the factory up and running. We considered some board spins. We did do it where we could, overnight testing, and then that occurred more than once. Of course, you're getting the call at 3 in the morning at work that didn't work or whatever, so that was also ongoing. So for the most part, I think most of you got this right. But again, it was at the end of the day, it was face-to-face negotiations and relationship building with suppliers. But having this guy Tom Lin walking with me, I mean, the supply base looked at him as a god. Even the Japanese in the electronics side, because he had so much experience and such a great reputation. Okay, so for the second, the AP, I mean, this is simple. Most of you got it. If they get it, why don't I get it? Right? It was like that, right? So that was one of the 2 or 3 things on the agenda. I did like one of the questions around from you, sir. So what's ramification? Well, you have to take care, especially as a small company. Small guy might not have a lot of cash flow, banking facilities that others do. Large companies, I learned this in Japan when I worked there in Yokohama, you can beat on them all day long, who cares, right? From that perspective. Now, Shell, you guys don't want to hear all that, but the small guys, you got to take care of. You have to take care. The reality, though, is if Taiwan gets 60 days, why don't I get 60 days? So that should be relatively easy. In fact, we got up to 63. The second one, I think all of you, except for the last team, I believe got the inventory question. Yeah, you did what I did. I mean, I built a spreadsheet, right? When I was growing up in business school, we had Lotus 1, 2, 3. And I never heard of it, but that's what I learned on. Sorry. Third question. All right, so here's the real big one. How do you get the stuff out of your factory? Well, there's two ways. First, start shipping. It's amazing what happens to your inventory when you start shipping to the schedule. It just flies out, right? It just and so that was a natural occurrence. But the other one that was not as natural, some of you mentioned it, just in time. In this case, we did just in time with the third-party warehouse. Another burden on the supplier, where it was a warehouse that was built, co-located next to our factory in a matter of months, and the suppliers had to store their inventory that they owned in that factory or that distribution center. And they had to pay the guy didn't make much money, but that was a mandate to stay with us. And also, there were prices to pay. The good news about being in a high volume, large company is you do have leverage. Again, keep in mind the small guy, but other than that, you have more leverage than you think, and you should utilize it and not be bashful for doing it. We did use IT system. It's called schedule sharing, way back whenever. Probably still out there, much better versions. But what we did is we were very careful on how we showed our MRP to the supply base. So basically our demand signals. So we experimented with it to some level, and we also used schedule sharing and then changed our philosophy to manage to a min-max level. And every time the MRP was respun, maybe the min and max changed for the buyer. So we had to retrain the buyers, and we managed at a mid-level of what should come in. And we micromanaged high dollar inventory, I mean, even at my level. I mean, the Broadcom stuff that came in, it was expensive, right? So we micromanaged that so they weren't shipping more than we wanted, because I don't think they went into the third-party warehouse. So, but nonetheless, the schedule sharing tool and managing to min-max really helped us identify very, very early where there could be a glitch in the supply base or the supply system. And in one case, we knew 6 weeks prior. That started an escalation process where the buyer was rewarded to tell the supervisor or the manager, who was rewarded to tell me like a week later, who was rewarded, and I was rewarded if I told my boss, because we wanted to keep our factory running. So it wasn't a foul that a supplier was messing up, it was more of a foul that you didn't tell anybody. But it was changing the process on how we fundamentally managed our supply base, at least from an electron perspective. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what we did. Let me see if I wrote down anything else. No, that was pretty much it. So there's a lot of things to do around taking cost out of a BOM. A lot of you touched on a lot of it. I'm not going to stand here and preach to you what a commodity team does. The reality is you have to stand up a commodity team. In this case, we invested in Horsham, in headquarters on commodity managers. But what we did was very, very important is we attached the local factory managers to the teams. Why? If you keep the commodity managers negotiating from afar, what's important to them? That they don't have to worry about the factory. Can the supplier ship? Or did they ship on time? What was the quality level? Did they disrupt your lines because they shipped you a defective product 3 times in a row. Well, I don't want to use these guys at all, right? So that information was reflected into negotiation strategies, right, and used against the supplier if they weren't doing, what about customer focus? We asked you a question, you didn't respond, right? We gave you 3 days, and it wasn't a weekend, or, all that kind of stuff. So, use of commodity teams, pooling the spend, the critical part here about what about when you have sole source. Somebody, I think, maybe touched on it. You've got to coordinate this through the senior ranks and engineering teams and everybody else, marketing even, sales even, is you either threaten or you're prepared to, in the next design phases, to use another supplier. So that's something in your toolbox you might want to think about. Spot buys, we took a significant advantage. One of the things I did not tell you in the case study, and I know you guys are busy, but in February of 2001, the market dropped significantly because there was a glut of all this stuff, including salt filters, 16 meg and 8 meg SD-RAM and phantom capacitors, and that really helped us to go after in some spot deals. So I told the judges before I went specifically to Seoul, Korea to negotiate face-to-face with Hynix. And I think we had a standard part, the SD-RAM was like $255 or so a unit, and 2 per the BOM. And we got it down like, I think, 40 cents a piece with good quality, date codes, everything. So you can imagine how powerful that is. So, there's different considerations when the market's going up, right? The business cycle, and one when it goes down. And when you guys really get a lot better is when you see a couple of these business cycles and you live through them, and you're still hanging in there, because that's when you learn all this stuff. Unfortunately, going up is a lot easier theoretical problem. Going down is, it can be a nightmare in some ways. And then, yeah, I think you can read these. Let me see if I have anything else. We did use preferred suppliers. A lot of you guys talked about that, depending on what the commodity was. We're not afraid to do that. Didn't necessarily give somebody 3 years. In the case of the power supplies, we had 2 Taiwanese suppliers, and I had a Panasonic, actually, my old company in the wings, developing one, because I always learned have two stable, one in the wings, and then they can flip them over time. It's a strategy. So in this case, with the 2 Taiwanese suppliers, it would usually go like this. Somebody would get 70% for a quarter, and the other guy would get 30%. And if the other guy, did everything we wanted them to do, they would get the volume the next time. So we weren't afraid to flip it around. So if you lock into 3 years, you lose all that flexibility. The other thing they did was, or that occurred, is the Taiwanese suppliers, as you can imagine, were more mechanical in nature, some memory, but for the most part, wire harness, chassis, escutcheon, power supplies, some other stuff. So part of what occurred back then wasn't just our company or us. It was a migration to mainland China, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, also Thailand, to some level the Philippines, low-cost production centers. And the Taiwanese suppliers, the small, hardware suppliers, all moved to basically mainland China. One company moved to Bangkok for those power supplies. And there were quality issues. And in fact, we had a recall on the socket that plugs into the wall, right? And it was pretty bad. And one of the reasons is somebody local in the Chinese factory changed the spec without going through the engineers up in their counterparts in Taiwan. So you have to be very careful when you shift, and you have to do a lot of testing. So just because you move to a low-cost center doesn't mean everything's going to work great. I think everyone's probably eyes are glazing over. Like, let's see what else. No, that's pretty much it. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Questions for Nick?
I've got a question. If you've got a long-term contract, and as long as it's not exclusive, why would you have trouble switching it from period to period?
Oh, you wouldn't necessarily, but if you guarantee them volume,
Okay.
you might have trouble, right? So,
You can still have a long-term contract and not a big.
you can have a long-term contract, but, I mean, you can have all kinds of things that, I personally like the flexibility because the market conditions do change, right? I did like the idea of, look at the, and you can look in the, back then we looked at magazines, not online, I think, what does 4 meg cost or $16? We're getting rid of that kind of information. It does exist. It is powerful, but it can't be your only source of information. It just has to be one tool. Any other questions?
What did you do with the obsolete pieces?
Well, what happens when something goes obsolete is usually it's been sitting for 12 months, over 12 months. At that point, it becomes a financial issue. So what we did was we tried to sell it also to the brokers, right, or to sister divisions in Motorola. And sometimes we were able to do it. Other times it was, especially in the low volume business, a lot of it was custom build to print stuff. That's hard to get rid of. So what happens is you write it off. And if you look at an annual report and the balance sheet, you're going to see in there somewhere write-off for obsolescence. And the tricky part is this: you're still going to carry it on a gross basis. That's why I like to measure myself on a net, because I can't do anything about it necessarily. But you still have to show it. But hopefully you're measured on net and not on that E&O part. So the other thing is the financial teams usually, they might carry it for an extra year even. And again, there's nothing you can do about it, just because it's not the right time to do a write-off or write-down.
I have a question. Do you reach the goal, cut the bill of material cost within 3 months by 15%? Do you
No,
reach the goal?
it was over a course of a year, and
Okay.
that clock started in January because we got the commodity teams up. Everyone was just saying, get off the gray market. Nobody was really asking us much to cut the cost of the BOM cost, but we knew we had to do it because we're professionals and that's what we needed to do. Plus, when we saw the market in general starting to really dump, we knew we had to catch it. So that's what we did. And a lot of times you don't know until the very beginning. People are coming to you with little deals, and that's another way to give intelligence around what's happening in the market. So it was a 12-month process, and the answer actually for us is we got 18% out that first year that we really went at it. Oh, by the way, that first year, 2000, every executive at BCS captured their bonus. And the second year too, and mainly because of the cash. Because it wasn't just on sales or margin, it was also on how you, every executive was bonus was like 50% on cash. Like, how would you like to be in sales? I have nothing to do with that, but it was good.
All right, how about a round of applause for Nick? I'd like to seize one more moment, if the judges are willing, and let you bring up 2 or 3 points that you saw are, good or constructive, just to give the teams a little bit of feedback. We can start over here and do that. I'm just going to check out in the hall. I'll be right back.
I thought